Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen Frankfurt, Chief Marketing Officer with NextFactor Enterprises, and I'd like to thank you for attending our latest Destination Next Trailblazer webinar, Creating Unforgettable Customer Experiences. The purpose of these webinars is to provide strategies and case studies to help destinations be more competitive in the global visitor economy. Many of you are familiar with Destination Next, which NextFactor produces in collaboration with Destinations International. Just to recap, the strategic framework includes the Future Study, which highlights leisure travel and meetings trends worldwide, and the Assessment Tool and Scenario Model, which measures destination strength and community engagement support. During the past 3 years, we have assessed almost 200 destinations around the world. What you're going to see next is an illustration of the scenario model and the Trailblazer category, which represents both high destination strength and high community support and engagement. At NextFactor, we leverage the insight from Destination Next to produce destination master plans. These are comprehensive, community-led strategic roadmaps that provide a comprehensive overview for how destination organizations can align tourism and economic development and manage the growth of their destination during the next 5 to 10 years. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our friends at DMA West for their promotion and support of this webinar. DMA West has 2 fantastic events coming up this year: their Leadership Summit for CEOs, which will be in July, and the Education Summit and Vendor Showcase and Best Idea Program, which takes place in October. For more information, please visit dmawest.org. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Joe Veneto, Chief Experience Officer at Veneto Collaboratory, and my colleague Greg Oates. They will be discussing how destination organizations can drive higher competitive advantage in today's continually evolving experience economy. Just 2 quick reminders, please. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent to all of you. There will also be time for questions at the end, so please submit your questions in the webinar panel during the discussion. I'm going to turn this over to Greg and Joe, and thank you again for attending today.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. Hey everyone, this is Greg Oates with NextFactor. Again, thank you all for joining. I'm very excited today to have Joe with us. Joe has been designing and developing experiences with destination organizations since 2004 across North America. And we're going to dig into what that means, what that looks like, and how experience design is moving forward. So first of all, Joe, thanks for joining us. And can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your company?
Sure. Greg, thank you. And Kathleen, thank you very much for allowing me to present this afternoon. So Veneto Collaboratory works with destination marketing, destination management organizations throughout North America. And what we do is we work with them to drive visitation, create economic development, and generate sustainable tourism economy. We do that primarily through the design and development of unforgettable destination experiences and also packaging strategies. And again, most of this is designed to drive visitation and create economic development.
Okay, perfect. Well, let's first talk a little bit about what we mean by experiences and product development, destination experiences. And you and I have talked that, destinations are as much emotional and intellectual experiences as they are physical ones. And these experiences and destinations, they each own emotional triggers and perceived social equity and promises of self-actualization. How exactly do you define experiences today?
So for me, when we talk about unforgettable destination experiences, what we're looking at is we want to create an experience that is going to impact and influence the visitor. And how do we do that? What we want to do is we want to either engage or immerse the visitor by providing a deeper, richer sense of the destination. And at the same time, what we want to do is we want to impact the visitor's emotional bank account. Now, some people may be thinking, emotional bank account, what does that got to do with product development? How's that tied together? For me, when we design an experience, we want to impact and influence the visitor such that that experience gets the visitor talking to other people about the experience that they had, or posting on social media. The ultimate goal is to convert the visitor through their emotional bank account to a destination brand ambassador.
Okay, excellent. Let's just provide a little bit more context around that too. Today I'm calling in from Kamloops in the interior of British Columbia and facilitated a workshop with the board of directors yesterday, and very much the conversation started and just built around this idea that we're not just building experiences, but we're driving economic development, as you said, and destination organizations now are positioning themselves as catalysts for economic development. And at the Destinations International CEO Summit last week, Jack Johnson, the head of advocacy, talked about how that organization is rolling out new positioning for DOs as really shared community assets, much like police, fire, hospitals, education, in the sense that the DO is critical for driving job growth and increasing the tax base and building the brand, which has all kinds of other benefits in terms of economic development, talent relocation, that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you have those conversations with DOs when you're working with them, Joe?
Well, when we look at product development and we look at designing experiences, one of the key factors is looking at how the destination is really part of the community. And so when we look organically at the assets, we don't just organically look at, historic or cultural or what are the attractions. We'll look at university, we'll look at sports, etc., so that all of those destination assets really become part of the equation when we're designing. And then certainly when you think about a community and designing experiences, while those experiences are driving visitation, what they're also doing is they're creating incredible quality of life for the locals. And so that economic piece for those products also serve as a catalyst to attract people as well.
Okay. So when we talk about designing experiences and product development and destination development, a lot of us are throwing these words around a lot more, especially as that aligns with community building and economic development. Can you talk a little bit about how you've sort of broken down this concept into different levels of destination development?
Sure, Greg, thanks. So when I talk about designing experiences with destination organizations, for many of them, it's new thinking. And as you can see from the slide, a lot of destinations are very familiar with the customer service aspect of destination development. In fact, I'm sure many people on the call have frontline service and customer care. That may be through tourism ambassadors that they train, volunteers, their visitor centers, etc. So people are familiar with that. And then at the top of the scale, destination infrastructure, which is major capital investments. So these major capital investments, think about convention centers, building hotels, resorts, perhaps sports fields, things like that. Those, again, at 30,000 feet, when we're looking strategically at major capital investments, people are familiar with those two ends of the spectrum. But in the middle, there's this huge opportunity for destinations. And it's the customer experience area where you can refresh and innovate your destination by designing and developing what I call unforgettable experiences. And the win, Greg, in this particular area is tremendous. It's not 10, 20, 30 years of debt service, and it's impacting the visitor and the visitor experience to create those visitor ambassadors. From an economic standpoint, these experiences are designed to extend a visitor stay, increase spending, and bring them back to a destination on a more regular basis. So this particular area, it represents a huge opportunity. And sometimes this sits in partnership, so it's an extension of partnership. Other times it might sit in destination sales and services. And then for other destinations, this does not exist yet, which is part of the new thinking for trailblazing destinations.
Right. And when you talk about increasing time and destination, higher average spend, we're also talking about visitor dispersal and getting people to move around the destination more and to go into perhaps underserved areas or just untapped regions. And Kamloops here looking at, developing a wine tourism economy, which has all kinds of benefits in terms of getting people to different areas of the destination to spend in different destinations. So again, really aligning with that economic development theme and driving that home. But let's dig into that a little bit deeper. Now, when you talk about customer experience, you have different levels of that. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. So when we take a look at a destination landscape, I typically will divide the experiences into one of three categories. So the first category is show and tell. And typically show and tell experiences, they're the kind of experiences that you can find anywhere. You can take a tour. You can visit a museum. You could go to a historic site. And these are open to any visitors. They may be, special in their own way, but they're part of what I'll call the vanilla fabric of a destination. And I can get these anywhere. When we look at show and tell type of experiences, the visitor's asking, do I have the time and or the money? So in many cases at this level, we're talking about commodity type of experiences. But when you move up to the next level, engaging experiences, these are experiences that are deeper and richer and that involve the visitor in some way. And a lot of times when you're developing engaging experiences, what you're doing is you're looking at specialty kinds of experiences or elements that you might find in a historic home or at a museum. And then finally, the third level is immersed, or the immersion level. And when you design immersion type products, these are experiences where the visitor is doing something. So they're totally immersed in the experience. So maybe I'm kayaking, maybe I'm cooking a meal with a chef. I'm bottling wine, or perhaps I'm with a first-person character, so I'm totally immersed in that type of experience. Now, the interesting thing, Greg, from an economic standpoint is as you move up the experience levels, you can charge more for those experiences. And when we get to immerse, what we want to do is we want to create experiences that are tied to a destination's DNA. And those experiences are such that I have to get them from you. So here, with this new slide on the right-hand side, what we have is we have the impact of each of those experiences. And I like to say that show and tell is a photo. So I have a show and tell experience, I'll take a photo, I might share it. Engage, on the other hand, is a story. So it's a story that's got more impact. And I may tell people, I may use it to post on social media, but immerse is a memory. And that memory, the most powerful, is tied to what I like to say customer commercials. Now, those commercials can be word of mouth or click of mouse. Those memories reside in the emotional bank accounts of customers. And so, for instance, Greg, if you were to say, Joe, have you ever been to Kamloops? Or if I were to ask you, hey, Greg, have you ever been to Kamloops? What you would do is, based on your experience, you'd go into your emotional bank account that has Kamloops on it. And you'd be able to, I'm sure, tell me some stories, but I bet, even better, you'd be able to recount some memories in Kamloops. The goal with this impact and influence from a visitor standpoint is imagine visitors coming in to your destination, what they're doing by creating these commercials and not only telling other people, but posting on social media, they're amplifying your message. They become brand ambassadors that become your destination ambassadors that amplify the message. And again, this is why engaging in immersive experiences are so powerful and they're so important.
So interesting. It's cool how you broke this down. And the more memories, the more better memories, the sort of more higher balance in your emotional bank account, the higher balance in the bank account really leads to more destination loyalty. That's what we're really talking about. But at the same time, you can have withdrawals, right, for a bad experience.
Yes. Withdrawals also happen. In fact, people close their emotional bank accounts all the time. And usually it's not the big things, it's usually little things or a series of little things. But the goal here is to fill those emotional bank accounts with positive things to create those brand ambassadors and customer commercials. But you're right, Greg, the reverse does exist.
Okay. Now this slide sort of breaks it out a little bit more and provides some examples. Could you just go through this for us, Joe?
Sure. So what I've done is I put together a little bit of an outline here for you folks on the phone so that you could see this. If we were to take a historic site and we looked at show and tell, engage, and immerse, for example, a show and tell experience would be, I sign up for a tour. So I've got a docent-led tour with a guide. But what if we took that tour and we put an expert, in this case, a curator. So the curator took me around and I did the tour of the historic site with a curator. Or better still, the immersion version of that experience is we go to the archives and we go to behind the scenes, visit the archives, and now we've got a deeper, richer kind of experience. So again, to give people a little bit of an idea of how these levels progress and how they impact the visitor experience. From a culinary standpoint, it could be a restaurant, but it could be a culinary venue. Most people show and tell. I like to say visitors survive on their stomachs, right? And culinary is a super hot category. It has been for a number of years, but I can go to a great restaurant and I can have a great meal, which is wonderful. But if I do a chef's tasting where the chef guides me through it, I'm engaged in a different way. Deeper, richer, talking about flavor profiles, why things are put together this way. And then the immersion version of that is doing a cooking lesson with the chef where I'm guided through. From a brewery standpoint, brewers will provide all kinds of tastes. You can go breweries around the country and pay for tasting. But what if you were to pay for tasting and a tour? And so you learned about the different types of brews while you were touring, and then you did their taste. And then the third level, the immersion version, is you have the brewmaster take you through. The brewmaster who's responsible for brewing the different kinds of beer, and then you've got access to learn about what's it like in his world. What happens during the day and the life of a brewmaster. And then finally, we have retail. And Greg, a lot of times when destination organizations look at their landscape, they will include historic sites, they'll include museums, culinary venues, certainly breweries, but a lot of times retail is really not, considered it's part of the tourism economy, but they may not be, tourism partners that are always at the table. And yet, retail experiences are huge opportunities for destinations. So a lot of times, retail venues as well, they're focused on the transaction. They want visitors in the door and they want them to shop. But I say, let's ratchet this up and let's create an engaging kind of experience. And we actually worked a number of years ago with the Mall of America on these kinds of experiences. And so you look at a retail shop or retail store, and you create a demo where you teach me about the product. And then finally, the immersion side of that is to use or design an experience that incorporates the product. So maybe it's home decor, and you're teaching me how to put things together in unique combinations with home decor products. Or maybe it's a fashion show. Back in 2010, we worked with the Nordstroms in Columbus, Ohio, to design an immersion experience called What's in Fashion. And so it was, again, taking the category of show and tell and moving it to engage or immerse.
Excellent. I was at McCarran Airport in Las Vegas a couple of days ago, and something I'd never seen was a Chanel pop-up store. And it was a way to just learn about the product in a whole new way. I think that's a good point. Hadn't really thought about that before, but destinations can do a lot more with experiential retail. Okay, excellent. So let's look here at this mural tour. Can you just sort of walk us through how you worked with the destination, really how it began and how that collaboration evolved?
Sure. So back in 2004, the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau was the first destination that we had worked with, and Sam Rogers, who was the vice president at the time, said, "Joe, we need some help with our destination landscape, and we're looking to drive visitation." And Greg, you might imagine, I'm thinking to myself, Philadelphia, you're a wildly successful destination. And what Sam said was very insightful. What he said was, "Joe, people come to Philadelphia all the time. They see the historic area and they think, we've seen Philadelphia." And Sam said, "Joe, we've got deeper, richer attractions and experiences." And so what he did was he put together a dozen of his partners, museums, historic sites, culinary venues, etc. And we worked with that group to design a host of experiences that were engaging and immersive. Now, Philadelphia Mural Arts Program was one of those partners back in 2004. For those of you who don't know this, Philadelphia is the world's capital of outdoor murals. They have over 3,000 murals throughout the city. It started back in 1984 when the city had a graffiti problem. And the first murals that were painted were actually painted by convicted graffiti felons. So the folks at Mural Arts came in, we sat down, and we talked about the kind of experiences that they had. And they have a tour. So they said, "Joe, you can take any number of tours. We've got tour guides, we have trolleys. What kind of murals would you like? Would you like sports murals, helping murals, historic Philadelphia murals?" And I thought to myself, well, that sounds great. Those murals are wonderful. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to meet an artist. I wanted to meet a mural artist who would take me to their murals. And I wanted to hear the story, because each mural has an interesting story. You see, there's a collaboration with the neighborhoods to create a mural that has a story. And so we created level 2, or engage level, an experience called Meet the Artist, where you would go with an artist to see the different murals in and around Philadelphia that they had designed and developed with the neighborhoods. And then you see a mural in progress, so you can see how it's actually being done. And they said, "Well, this is great. We love this design." And I said, "Wonderful." And then I said, "But I want the immersion version of this experience." And they said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "I want to paint a mural." And they looked at me and they said, "Joe, you can't paint a mural." They said, we'd have insurance issues and scaffolding. I mean, we can't do this. And I said, "No, you don't understand. I want my mural bragging rights. I want to paint a mural." And they thought about it, and it took us a little bit of time. And interestingly enough, Greg, they said, well, there may be a way. We had prisoners, incarcerated prisoners, paint murals as a give back to the community. Maybe we can use the model that we use with them for visitors.
Oh, no way.
And that's exactly what happened. So what happens, Greg, is that an artist will take parachute cloth and they will sketch out the mural. And then what they do is they do sort of a paint by number, if you will. So what happened with the prisoners is they filled in the mural. In other words, they did the paint by number. When the mural was complete, the mural left the prison. The prisoners stayed in the prison, because that's a very good thing to have happen. But what they did was they took the completed mural and they adhered it and sealed it to the wall of the building, and it looks as if it's actually painted on.
I had no idea. Wow.
So 2005, Mural Arts and a dozen other destinations released these experiences, but Mural Arts has now level 2 and level 3. And so they use these, and particularly the Paint a Mural, for team building. And these created 2 new economic categories that they are able to charge for that didn't exist before.
Right. So tying back to that economic development theme, and as we said before, it's not just a matter of driving higher average spend or longer time in the destination or visitor dispersal, but also creating new economic streams and also diversifying, as you mentioned at the beginning, diversifying the brand to be about more than what is traditionally known about. Love all that, especially like just how you worked with the organization, and where something seemed challenging at first, you guys came up with a creative way that really sort of provided something completely new for the destination. Just wanted to show this also slide. These are some of the different destinations that you've worked with. But moving into some of these other destinations that we're going to talk about, first, can you talk about the experience formula? So there's an actual structure that you have when it comes to working with organizations. Can you dive into this a bit?
Sure. So, Greg, when we work with destinations, what we typically do is we work with a blank canvas. So the destinations that you had shown on the previous slide, we come into a destination, we use the experience formula model, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but we go in with a clean slate and we look at what are the assets, what are the attributes that are tied to the DNA of a destination. So each and every destination comes up with, in most cases, a unique set of experiences. So when we talk about those engage in immersive experiences, these are yours. These are destination-specific experiences. We take the ideas that we have with the destination, and we put them through this model. So it has 3 parts. The first part is create the connection. How do we create an impactful connection throughout the different stages or parts of an experience? And we do that in a number of different ways. So first and foremost, create the connection. Number 2, nurture the narrative. How do we tell a story, or how do we tell the story? In many cases, story is where the most impact of an experience resides. In addition to that, you're usually not telling one story. You may be telling a story about, for instance, murals, but as I was telling you that story, I was also telling you how mural arts started, right? Graffiti problem. So you've got multiple stories that are told, that are sort of wrapped together. And number 3, find the feelings. Find the feelings means, how do we get to an emotional or a visceral level with the experience, which means we're going to have the impact that we want. And number 2, what's most important to the visitor? When you put those 3 together, Venn diagram, you hit that sweet spot. Connections, stories, feelings equal customer commercial and ambassadors.
Excellent. So, and again, that sweet spot speaks to what we talked about before, that highest level of experiences, that immersion level, creating memories, driving destination loyalty. So all of this is sort of connected. Okay, so in the interest of having some time for questions at the end, let's go through a couple more destination examples now. And just as a reminder to everyone listening in, please submit your questions on the control panel to the right. Joe, you and I talked about Metropolitan Hotel in Paducah, and when I first looked at this, I thought, well, I didn't quite get it, but as you went through the story, it's pretty cool. Can you talk a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Sure, thanks, Greg. So this is the Hotel Metropolitan, and many of you who have recently seen the movie Green Book may be familiar with what the Green Book is, but the Metropolitan Hotel, this was the African American hotel during the days of segregation and Jim Crow in Paducah, Kentucky. Paducah was on the railroad line, and African American entertainers who were on the Chitlin circuit would stay at this hotel. It was opened by Maggie Steed back in the early 20th century, 1910, and she realized there was this need for somewhere for African American entertainers to stay. They were coming through town, and unfortunately at the time couldn't stay in the same place as white entertainers. Well, the Metropolitan Hotel was a completely self-sufficient hotel up until the early 80s. Now, granted, the civil rights, 1969, all that was taken, but the hotel continued to operate for some of its past guests. Every major African American entertainer that came through town stayed here. Names like Ike and Tina Turner, Count Basie, Aretha Franklin, Billie Holiday, Thurgood Marshall, the Supreme Court Chief Justice. And this was a show and tell site in Paducah, Kentucky. We sat down with the executive director, worked with her, sketched out a script. So we designed, crafted, scripted, and staged an experience. And now the Metropolitan Hotel is an immersion experience. You go into the hotel, you arrive, Maggie Steed, who is the host, brings you in. But if you're white and you show up at the hotel, she asks you why you're there. And you go through this experience with her to understand what it's like staying at the hotel. And you're going through, seeing the different rooms, hearing the different stories of people who have recently stayed there because it's the 1950s. She tells you that there is one guest in the last room on the second floor. When you get there, she knocks on the door, and out comes Billie Holiday. Now, Billie Holiday ends up, it turns out, she is entertaining in Paducah, Kentucky that night, but the group on tour can't go to the concert. So she gives you a rendition of what she's going to sing that night. And again, Greg, this was completely organically developed with the executive director, the folks at the Convention and Visitors Bureau, by looking at this historic site and saying, how can we create something unique and special with our destination assets?
That's a great story, Joe. And talk about tying into local cultural DNA and leveraging that to not just create an experience, but I mean, what this does for the community building, what this does for the brand, but just what this does to show, the destination's place in history in the South. I mean, there's just so much to look at here. Okay, can you talk a little bit more about just the signature experiences that the organization has developed?
Yes. So Paducah is a UNESCO creative city, and it's a small city in Kentucky, but they are a UNESCO creative city of art, craft, and design. So in addition to the Metropolitan Hotel, they're also the home of the National Quilt Museum. And the National Quilt Museum had a show and tell tour. Now they've got an engaging experience, but they also have an immersion experience where you come in, you piece together a 9 square, a quilt square that you actually stitch together at a sewing machine. And Greg, I have to tell you, we were testing this experience, and I thought, well, men and women, how is this going to play? And the day we tested this, we had more men than women. And it's sort of interesting because one of the quilters told me, they said, when women get into quilting, they get in it for friendship and fun, etc. But when guys do it, all bets are off. It's all about the competition. The guys race to those sewing machines to try to be the first one done.
Interesting. What I think we could talk about those experiences, all of those, but those are all on the website, so anyone interested can go and look at those a little deeper. Now talking about sort of a larger mid-sized city, Meet Minneapolis, can you talk about how you worked with them?
Sure. So in 2012, Bill Deef, Vice President of Tourism at the time, he came to an experience lab that we had in Columbus, Ohio. And this is an event that we host each year, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But Bill came in to see what Columbus had done. And what he said to me was kind of interesting. He said, Joe, we need to refresh our landscape. He said, we're a large city, we're successful with driving visitation, but we don't have any new museums, new new historic sites, etc. And we want to refresh our landscape. So in 2013, we worked with Meet Minneapolis, which is the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and the Mall of America, and we designed 19 new experiences with their attraction partners and the Mall of America. Again, these were all engaging and immersive experiences that were brand new, didn't exist before, to generate some new revenue.
And again, the idea here is that a destination organization doesn't own these assets, and nor, as you mentioned before, has the budget to build them, but definitely can leverage the assets more effectively by creating these types of experiences and sort of facilitating a new way for visitors to kind of navigate through the destination. So that's really what we're talking about here. Can you talk a little bit about what you did with Fort Snelling in Minneapolis?
Sure. So what Meet Minneapolis decided was we needed to be the catalyst, right? They said we need to be the catalyst if we're gonna refresh and, more importantly, innovate the destination. So we worked with Fort Snelling on an experience called Beneath the Surface. Now you can take a tour of Fort Snelling. It's fully recreated fort. This is the original fort in the Minnesota Territory when the U.S. was expanding westward. It was almost completely destroyed, and with the help of archaeologists, they ended up fully reconstructing the fort, exact locations, exact replica. And we worked with the team at this historic site. It's one of Minnesota historic sites in the state. And the experience of Beneath the Surface is you spend time in the world of archaeologists. And interestingly enough, in addition to the fort, on the land where the fort sits, there's an outbuilding where the chief archaeologist for the Minnesota Historical Society has their lab. So we sat down with the Minnesota historical folks and the archaeology team, and we designed the experience called Beneath the Surface. So you go through the fort with glasses of an archaeologist, and then you learn about how the fort was saved and reconstructed, and then you go into the lab. You meet the chief archaeologist, and what she does is she tells you what they're working on around the state, but how they uncovered the fort, the artifacts that they turned up. She shows you how they protect and preserve them, and then you do a little bit of CSI, if you will, in the laboratory. You're given some artifacts, you have some materials, some books and some reference materials, so that you can sort of put the puzzle pieces together. And it's a fascinating way to to see this historic site.
Okay, and then this is a Rodin sculpture. We talked about this before, and I thought this was really interesting. Another example of how you're working with the organization. Take us through this one.
Sure. So this is the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And if you were doing what this woman is doing right now, touching a Rodin sculpture, you probably would be arrested in a museum. She's not blind, she's fully sighted, and we created an experience called A Taste of the Museum. Now imagine the MIA, world-class museum, 5,000 years of history, 80,000 objects, but they give you a taste of 15 of the most amazing artifacts in the museum. And this is one. We wanted to put something unique and special in the experience, and there are a couple of elements in here that average visitors can't do. So this is definitely an engaging and immersive experience, again, with a museum that's very successful, but now has a new revenue stream and a new way to engage visitors in what they have for art.
Plus, it gives the organization a new way to tell a story, a new piece of content, which, you know, as I look at all of these, I'm thinking that too. It's just a new way to drive engagement around the destination.
You're exactly right.
Okay, Madison, how did you work with them? This is more recently, I believe.
Yes, so last year, last October, we worked with Destination Madison on a dozen different experiences. And what we did before we developed the experiences is we did an assessment to take a look at that destination DNA. And what we found was there were some great experiences, but there were also some holes. There were some assets in the destination that didn't have an experience tied to them. So a couple of the unique ones, and I think you've got a slide here, Greg. So we've got two here, Bitters Boot Camp and the Mustard Museum. So for those of you that may not be familiar with Wisconsin, the craft cocktail of choice in Wisconsin is an old fashioned. Young or old people drink old fashions. Now, they're a brandy old fashioned, so they're really sweet. But we were working with a restaurant group, and they have 19 restaurants. But they said, we've got one restaurant that's kind of unique. It's an old supper club, and it's tied to the supper club scene in Wisconsin. What could we do? And we sat and we thought about the foods at the time and the cocktails, etc. And what you do is you come in and you learn about the old fashioned. So you have an old fashioned, but you also taste different kinds of old fashions being made with different kinds of alcohol, and more importantly, with different kinds of bitters. So bitters is what you add to different kinds of alcohol to change the taste and flavor. So bitters might be botanicals, they could be spices, they could be fruits. And what happens is after you've gone through your old-fashioned 101 and do your tasting, then you go over to a table and there are 15 different types of fruits, spices, botanicals, and you create your own bitters. Then you take the bitters home. After a month, you strain them, and you can tell all your family and your friends when you entertain them that you're going to make an old-fashioned using your preferred bitters.
Okay. A couple questions. I know we'll have a question for the end, but one that came in that we should address now. Who's paying for this? Is the organization paying for this, or is the business, or is it shared? How does that work?
Yeah, so each of the projects that we've done are shared. Usually what happens is they're sponsored by the destination, and then there's a shared investment. So the Bureau will invest funds in it, and then the partners also have some skin in the game. And they have to, because over the course of the project, which usually runs about 6 months or 7 months, what they're doing is they're designing, crafting, scripting, and staging the experience. What happens is when a museum, historic site, retail venue, or culinary venue go through the process, they have a process they don't just have a new experience that's tied to a revenue stream, but they have a process now that they can use for the future to filter that in. So each and every one of the projects has this shared investment. And again, the overall goal for the Bureau is how do we refresh or innovate our destination? Again, looking at social media, looking at creating those brand ambassadors, and then who are those partners that we want to pull in, who will work with us to create this new collection that will drive visitation.
Okay, perfect. So just ending with this now, you mentioned your Experience Lab earlier. Your 8th annual one is coming up in October, 3-day event. VenetoCollaboratory.com is where DO staff and executives can find more information. But it's not just all in sessions. You get out into the destination, you really dig into how this whole process works. You want to talk a little bit more briefly about the Experience Lab, Joe?
Sure. Thanks, Greg. So what happened back in 2012, I had a number of destination organizations that heard about the work and they wanted to see it firsthand. So we got tremendous amount of requests for destination marketing executives from around North America that wanted to come into a destination that we had worked with. And so we designed the first Experience Lab back in 2012, Columbus, Ohio. And the lab is for destination organization executives along with attractions. So some destinations bring key attraction partners. You know, we had Deadwood, South Dakota a number of years ago. We've had Shreveport, Louisiana, who bring attraction partners with them. What it is it's a 3-day immersion experience. There's a little bit of classroom. So we talk about why experiences are so important, how they impact your brand. We take you through a series of exercises. So you're designing an action plan as you go through it. But more importantly, there are 7 mobile workshops. So Madison, Wisconsin, you're going to go to 7 mobile workshops. So you're going to go to Bidders Boot Camp. You're going to go to the Mustard Museum, which was also on the previous slide. You're going to do a great experience on State Street, which is their main thoroughfare. And what you'll do is, like a visitor, you will experience each of these offerings. And then what we do is we pull the curtain back and we tell you how it was designed. And you also hear from the partners. So this is a real insider's look at how can I, as a destination, develop these. The concepts, Greg, that we've talked about this afternoon, these are not just concepts. These have worked in destinations around North America where, you know, attraction partners, retail sites, culinary venues have designed and developed amazing experiences that are generating economic development and driving visitation.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Joe. Just a few questions here. One, how long does this take? I'm assuming it, totally depends on the destination and what you're doing there, but can you provide a little bit of insight into the time frame for some of these?
Sure. So typically, the time frame is about 6 or 7 months, but that's not 6 or 7 months in destination. What happens is we work virtually and on site with a collection of destination partners and the destination organization, and we come in on a monthly basis to do consulting, coaching, and work one-on-one, along with helping people develop the idea, stage, and script it. And one of the interesting things that we've realized doing the work is having someone from the outside look at what most destinations and attraction partners are in the middle of every day. That outside perspective provides things that people don't see. The potential that the attractions have to develop these new experiences and take their business to a whole new level is tremendous.
Okay. Is there ever a case where a destination has been able to track the success of these, how it's driven more earned content or more revenue, or just anything anecdotal that you can talk about?
So all the destinations are doing various levels of tracking. What I can tell you is one of the most successful experiences, I call this the Grand Slam of experiences, it was in Columbus, Ohio. And it's an experience it was a retail outlet called the Candle Lab. And next door to this, it was a little strip mall, and there was a Candle Lab, and next door to him was a wine store. And we worked with them to create an experience called Wax, Wicks, and Wine. And you needed the wine because it took an hour for your soy candle to dry. Now what happens is you create your scent, you mix your candle, you go next door, you drink wine. So he started using this model and started working with groups. So think about group market, conventions, meetings, tour groups, family reunions, destination weddings, sports. He has 6 Candle Labs, different parts in the Ohio area, and he's private labeled another 15 to 20 around the country.
Okay, great. You know, we could look at, there's a few more questions here, but just in the interest of time, I think we should wrap things up. I want to sort of just quickly address this, though. There's been some various questions related to this. What do you see moving forward? How are experiences evolving? Any sort of insight that you can share with us for what destinations should look at moving forward, just so that we're staying on top of trends, and we can call it after that.
Sure. So I would say what you want to take a look at is the type of impact for experiences. Culinary is hot. Retail, again, for those destinations that have a lot of retail base and retailers are challenged right now, there's a way to freshen up those experiences. I would also say I look for transformational kinds of experiences. So the Metropolitan Hotel, for example, is one of those transformational experiences because it immerses you into the world of an African hotel hotelier. So for me, looking at the experiences, I want to look at where can we create something that's going to have the most impact. Again, Greg, it needs to be tied to the destination DNA, but every destination has possibilities. The key is new thinking. You know, for you and the team at Destination Next, to take and talk about this is really important because destination organizations need to be looking at this, saying, you know, okay, how do I need to not only change my thinking, but what we can do? Because this is different than what most destinations are used to. And yet there are a group of destinations which you showed and more, you know, interested all the time in saying, wait a minute, I can have a great hotel resort landscape, but it's all about the experience. That is the currency of 21st century travelers.
Okay, fantastic. I love what you said about transformational travel. How does travel and experiences align with the personal and professional goals of the traveler? How do we make that connection? How do you create experiences that can have that transformative effect? Also, related is this, I think we're seeing, and we will see, just continued growth in wellness tourism, and wellness experiences, but not just specifically physical, but more holistic, looking at mental, yes, emotional, you know, life management skills and coaching. I think there's all kinds of experiences in that, and any destination can tap into that. So lots of opportunity there. Okay, well, Joe, thank you very, very much for joining us today. Thank you, Kathleen. If anyone wants to reach out to Joe, there is his email. It was a pleasure, Joe, talking to you, and we'll have our next webinar, our next Destination Next Trailblazer webinar on June 27th. We'll be sending out some information on that shortly. But thank you, everyone, for joining the call today, and we will talk soon. So bye.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thanks, Joe.